Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. It's a beautiful Monday here in Austin, Texas. I am honored to have my partner, my friend, my associate, my co-host, the great James Anir with me. How are you doing, buddy?
Lovely, you know, doing well. Thank you.
You're
It's
you're surviving the Florida heat, that's for sure.
again, but I nothing to complain about compared to yours, I guess. So yes, um, frittering my time away, that kind of thing. That's how it is in South.
Yes. Well, we are so grateful for many new subscribers that have joined our YouTube channel. We are inundated with lots of email. Some of them are just saying thank you. We got a couple most recently where it moved me just emotionally to hear some people just reach out and say thank you. There's nothing like this. We love it. It's helping us so much. It's generating some really healthy conversations between my partner or my spouse and I. And James, I'll let you speak to it in a minute, but we love that. We do this because it's part of our vision. For me, because I come from faith, it's a calling that I kind of fell into years ago, no pun intended. And I love what I do. I know that you and Sharon love what you do, but maybe speak to some of the email you're getting and responding to. Haven't gotten that assistant yet, still answering our own email. It's going to be like that for quite some time too, right, buddy?
Yeah, I think I caught up with like last month, yesterday or today. So we do get really lovely emails. We get some that are asking for advice, which of course, we have to be cautious about because we are not actually immediately involved with the people asking for the advice, and we can't really do it over email. And but that's fine. We also get great questions that people want answered, and we also get these really fantastic comments about how much it is helping. And got one of those that really was very touched by. So, Mike, if you're out there, thank you very much. It was a really heartfelt email, and really, that's why we do this. If it not for the gratitude, but for being able to help people, for people being finding this stuff helpful, and keeps the impetus going to keep doing it. And
Yes. And for those of you that are emailing in, we are going to do our best to answer those questions as soon as we can, or maybe put them into episodes or what have you. And for those of you that are just reaching out to say, hey, love your work. Hey, we love you listening. So we'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. Today's question is one that can affect literally any unfaithful partner. The only unfaithful partner that won't be able to find this podcast helpful is for those who are unwilling to change or refuse to change. But anybody even remotely considering changing their life or making changes to their recovery work or their relationship or what have you is going to find today's episode to be quite riveting. Today's question is, what are the 5 stages of change for the unfaithful partner? Now, we made an assumption there that the unfaithful want to change. And we'll throw out a brief disclaimer to say, if nothing changes, nothing changes, right, buddy?
that is so very true. Uh, if you don't want it, and you don't look for how to do it and then engage in that, it's gonna stay exactly the same.
And if we want it more than you do, or if your therapist, pastor, priest, rabbi, coach, accountability partner, sponsor, buddy, best friend, whatever, sister, or your brother, if they want it more than you, it's never going to work. As a great friend of mine, Rick Reynolds, would say, put your running shoes on and get running, because that unfaithful is not serious about their recovery work. But for those of them that are, or maybe the betrayeds that are listening, James, that are like, okay, hey, help me understand where my partner's at. Maybe talk a little bit about what is change. What does it look like, sound like? And I'll let you get off and running with it?
There are stages to change, right? And I think, this can be applied to any kind of behavior or way of being that we want to change. So it really applies to everything. Obviously, we're focused on the arena that we're focused on. So I think I'll start with kind of a definition. That's the process, right, that by which people change, and it's most often thought of, as a cycle, but it doesn't have to be going from one to the next. Matter of fact, you can find yourself here, go back here, come to here, come back here. There's some overlap and sometimes some regression and movement forward, and we'll talk about that a bit. But you can even be in two stages at once, sort of flip flop, flip flop, flip flop.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand because when you're looking at this, obviously, one of the reasons we're doing this is so that the unfaithful can look at this and go, "Oh, that's where I am, and this is what
Yes.
I need to do to get to this next stage," right? And the partner, we've gotten a few questions that say, "How do I know if my unfaithful is serious about this?" And so this kind of is going to be able to tell you, "Oh, wow, they're in that particular stage of change, and whoa, how long have they been there?" Because we can get stuck in some of these, and so they'll be able to look at that, and that's going to help them evaluate, what they need to do as well. So that identifying for us unfaithful, identifying where we are, we can then identify our next need, and that's also really important for the people who are helping us, and they will do.
Well, yeah. And I don't know about you. I was struggling for paper to take notes because I'm always taking notes during our podcast. I'll go back and listen to them again, but I I have such a great caseload with some wonderful people that anytime I pick up nuggets from you, I love to write them down. I also remember things for me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that. But the thing that this, like so many of our podcasts, serve as is a litmus test. So if you think you're changing, listen today and see where you're at. If you think you've arrived, listen to today and see where you're at. Man, 20 years ago, if I'd have had this, it could have saved me so much more pain, frustration, anger, confusion, hopelessness. It would have been a bit of a North Star. And if we can be part of the North Star for people, then man, we're all in. So, James, take us away. What is stage one?
Okay, stage one is pre-contemplation. So this is exactly what it sounds like, right? Not seeing or acknowledging that there's a problem that needs to be changed. In fact, this is where the unfaithful can still experience their acting out as positive. They haven't hit any kind of a real bump in the road or hit their bottom for sure, and haven't really experienced a lot of negative consequences that they can't just sort of blow off. This is also a stage where we as unfaithful are extremely self-centered. So everything revolves around us at this point, and that's problematic because when we're doing that, we're not seeing the damage it's doing to anybody else.
Right.
So we're actually we're so much into that and into our acting out. We're so preoccupied with the hyper arousal of planning, right? So hyper arousal is basically, this is in infidelity where we're getting the biggest dopamine response. So the biggest high, if you will, is in the thinking about it, the planning, etc. The actual acting out, not so much. I know that sounds illogical, but this is brain wise the biggest high that we're going to get, the largest amount of dopamine, adrenaline, oxytocin, et cetera, that's flying around in our brains. So
Fascinating.
we're fantasizing about it, we're thinking about it,
Mm.
we're looking forward to the release and relief of the stresses that are going on in our lives, the perceived negative issues that are going on. But a lot of the time, those are caused by our acting out, but we just can't see it. And then the self-perpetuating shame that we have, because the
Yeah.
shame then drives us to do this again and again.
So in this release and relief, is it safe to say at this point we are actively in denial of what our choices are doing to people and we're just justifying it, minimizing all of that?
Yes, this is exactly where we're doing that, this stage. And we also are, are not seeing the effects that it's having on us, which it is. We don't see that till later or when we experience negative consequences. So, that's really problematic because it's also where we'll most attach at the beginning to making change is what are the negative effects it's having on me? Because guess what? We are self-centered. We're selfish. If it's having a negative effect on us, that's going to be an impetus for change. I wish I could say it was, oh my God, look at what I'm doing to my partner.
Right.
I would love that. That kind of empathy is not in existence in this stage. It has to be.
And it's so worth noting. So many betrays, male or female, are like, why can't you see? Shouldn't they see what they're doing? No, unfortunately, they are in their addiction, or they are in their high, and then maybe they're not a sex addict or what have you, but they're still in acting out mode, and they are still in their own world. They cannot see it,
Got their
right?
blinders on, right? I don't know if people know what blinders are, but I've seen them on a horse. A
Yeah.
horse and carriage going through the street. The blinders almost cover the horse's eyes. That's all I can see is directly in front. And that's what it's like for us. We're just so tunnel visioned. So, if we're not considering the behavior to be a problem, why? One, we've talked about it, we haven't experienced negative consequences yet, or sufficiently negative to not be able to be brushed off. We're in denial about the severity of those consequences when we do experience them. We're literally getting high. It doesn't matter whether you're an addict or a compulsive or somebody in an affair, you're still getting high from that affair partner. Believe me, in your brain, you're getting high. Your dopamine levels are spiking, your adrenaline levels are spiking, oxytocin with an affair partner is spiking. Um, so we are getting high. We're using another person to get high. So where somebody might use alcohol to get high or drugs to get high, we're using other people to get high. And it feels too good to even contemplate stopping at this point. So
Isn't it isn't it safe to say, and I'm teeing this up for you because I think it's a pivotal part. Isn't it safe to say that we unfaithful use our affair in an effort to avoid uncomfortable feelings about life, about our partner, about ourselves, about unmet dreams, unfulfilled expectations? So instead of, as the popular buzzwords are, sit with it or lean into it or experience it, we would rather avoid it. That was me. I'm not shaming anybody. I would rather avoid it. I would rather get high. I would rather act out. Anything I could do to not feel bad, I was willing to do. Is that fair?
beyond fair. I mean, we're so fearful of having to deal with our stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just we don't have the coping skills. Nobody necessarily, or either we didn't get taught those, or we're just not using them, right? So we also can be like change can be stopped by being fearful of literally having no way to feel okay. Unfortunately, feeling okay in the past has meant I'm going to avoid that feeling or those feelings, or shut them down or stuff them, rather than, oh, if I learn how to deal with these feelings, then they're not going to affect me in the way that I'm so fearful about, right? They'll just be signifiers to me that something needs to be talked about or something needs to change and so on. So yeah, it really is about avoiding. The problem with avoiding and stuffing, especially stuffing, is if we stuff all of our negative feelings, guess what else we stuff?
Positive.
Yes, sir. We can't select. It's like losing body fat. You can't say I'm going to lose body fat off my belly. No, you lose it overall, right? And the belly actually
Yeah.
is the last thing to go. So there are a couple other things in this stage that are indicative of it, and one is being really defensive about it if somebody brings it up, right? Or somebody kind of brings it to us. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to hear it if it's outside of our integrity or wrong or hurtful or harmful, affecting others, or that other people, even or especially our partner, have even noticed, right? We don't want to hear it. We like to just sort of bury our head in the sand like an ostrich,
Hmm.
go, no, 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 no. Or
Yeah.
right. And then we talked about negative consequences, but that has to affect them directly. And those negative consequences have to be significant enough to open their eyes to maybe a problem is happening. And that's going to be the impetus to move into the next stage. That negative consequence has to exceed what they perceive to be the positive of doing what they're doing.
Okay. So stage number 2, what's that?
Contemplation. So previous was pre-contemplation. Now there's contemplation. This is kind of where you recognize there is an issue. You may not have put your finger on it, but you recognize there is one, and can acknowledge that, at least to yourself, that there's a problem. But you're not going to be certain at this point whether you want to change or are ready to change, or even if you can change. That's a big one. I can't change. I can't do this. Right. That feeling of incapability surrounds this, especially when you're in contemplation. So you're starting to weigh stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So at this point now, we're really starting to think about what we're doing, what you're doing, and that's starting to happen at a deeper level, right? So it's not just, oh, yeah, I'm just doing this, boom. It's starting to think about, I'm doing that. That's really bothering me, and why is that bothering me? So at this point, you start weighing pros and cons. What's the benefit of doing this? What's the negative of doing this? And kind of weighing that out. There's a difficulty in doing that, in that making the change is very positive, right? But it's longer term. So it's much slower positive than the, hey, let me do this behavior. Ooh, I feel so much better, right? It's going to take some time to feel better. And so difficulty in seeing that those long-term benefits outweigh the costs of what their current behaviors are.
Right.
Again, they're only saying this about themselves, not anybody else who is affected at this stage. There's also learning in this stage, right? So they might be looking at learning some of the basics about what changes need to be made. They might be doing a little bit of research here, trying to figure this out. But they're going to be approaching this in a very simple way in order to kind of set it up in their head that it's going to be easy to be able to move forward if I choose to do that. There are kinds of thoughts that get stuck in your head, like, hey, I'm going to just reduce this, or I'm going to put limits on it. Yeah, I'm going to stop. But usually there's failure involved with that stopping. So that's kind of a key to, is there a problem? I've tried to stop and failed at that.
Yeah.
And then there's also in this stage of movement out of denial. And we become, not completely, but just enough movement that we're a little more open to hearing about the issue from others. We might even ask somebody. We might make the mistake of asking somebody who's going to go, no, man, it's all good. Keep doing it. Hopefully
Right.
that's somebody who's going to really be able to tell us the truth and be honest but supportive, right? And this would be a really good thing for you to do, encouraging. We start seeing the link between the behaviors and the consequences. So if I do this, then this happens. And it's a really critical stage. And it's critical.
So
Yeah.
when we get into the criticalness of it,
Yeah.
because there eventually comes a point that we there's like a blip on the radar, and we're like, I really should do something about it. So what happens during that part?
We can tell ourselves, I really need to do something about that. The same way, we're walking in the door of the house and there's if some of the paint is bubbling off the door frame. I really need to do something about that. If you're anything like me, like 5 years later, you're going, I really need to do something about that bubbling paint, right?
Yeah.
Then it's worse, right? So we can get stuck and in ambiguity. And I'm serious, it can be for years, right? We can also go back to the pre-contemplative, like make the decision, nah, this is okay. We can convince ourselves that it's okay. There, we deliberately weigh the positives as exceeding the negatives. We kind of put more emphasis on those. We can't, sometimes we can't seem to stop. That could be addictive, obsessive, like with obsessing about an affair partner, compulsive, making those texts, acting out, and so on. And then there's the excuses. And one of the big ones is the only person I'm hurting is myself. And really,
Yeah.
what does that mean? I don't want to give up the high.
Well, we don't want to give up the high, but we also, it's a way that we have found to survive. And
Yes.
so we've kind of said, this is how I make sense of my life. Leave me the heck alone. This is what I do. And everybody's got bad choices or sins or hidden skeletons in the closet. But isn't it a point where when we start to admit that maybe we're actually wrong, that we're starting to come up for air?
Yes. And that coming up for air is seeing that it isn't getting better, right? Maybe and probably even getting worse. And being able to say, I've tried to stop. I don't know how to fix it for myself.
Yeah.
And then receiving, so I talked about that person that you ask for help. If it's encouraging, that really mean what I mean by that is non-judgmental. It's not like, somebody yelling and screaming at you, telling you what a piece of garbage you are, but they're going to be, and this isn't your partner, by the way. This is going to be somebody who can really encourage you to do the right thing and not hold you in judgment over it, because then it's going to be far more effective. Because if we're thrown into that defense posture, we're going to go back to it at this
Yeah.
stage. So confronting can lead to sort of a rebellious stance, like a teenager, right? We actually literally regress into our teenager. You don't get to tell me what to do. I'm a grown ass man and stuff, right? F you,
Yeah.
and which drives us back to acting out. It's a regressed teenage reaction, which really means no, I won't be responsible. I can do what I want. If, however, we have at this point determined that the negative consequences outweigh the positive, then we know we have to do something about it. Something has to change. And we start thinking about that change and who to ask for help. And, it's really, we start to realize, hopefully, because we see this a lot with people who go into the next stage, we have to realize that it's not about doing it ourselves, because we can't. We've already tried. If it is about doing it ourselves, it's really, it's likely doomed, and we're really not going to be moving into the next stage.
Well, and I tell people that reach out to me, whenever somebody emails me looking for help or coaching, I always tell them, proud of you for doing this, because this is what separates people who are serious and people who are not serious. Because people who are serious are going to reach out to somebody for help. They're going to move towards someone to say, I cannot do this on my own. I've tried, and I'm going to stop the insanity of thinking that I'm going to be able to somehow do this on my own. So let me go get help from somebody else. So what's the third stage?
Well, the third stage is preparation, right? So preparation indicates exactly what it does. It's kind of an action, but it's really planning, right? So this is where we're determined and committed to change, and we're planning and preparing to carrying out those changes that we've learned about in doing some of our research, and asking people. And what you have to notice here that's really significant is that there's self-motivation.
Right.
So you start seeing somebody who says, "Oh, I'm going to go to a meeting," or "Oh, I bought this book. I'm reading that." Then that, or you notice yourself doing that. That self motivation that is key to this stage. Without that, you're not going to be able to move forward. So that motivation of, I've got to do something. I'm going to do something, and then here, before in the contemplation, they might have gathered some little bits of information. Now it's going to be far more detailed, right? They're going to research, they're going to ask questions, they're going to watch stuff like this, and find out what it takes to make the change.
Because they want to. And if it goes back to what we said at the front, if we want it more than they do, we have a big problem. When nobody, I had some clients a while ago, they would never do their homework. They would never do anything I asked them to. Any little tool or any significant tool, they never did it. And finally I just said, guys, like, what are we doing? everything I ask you to do, y'all don't do. And it's been several weeks of this. So without the self-motivation, it's not going to work. So what are some other steps within this preparation that they can revert to or actually apply?
Don't skip this stage. I'm sorry. That's just, this is something you can apply. You can't skip this stage. Most of the studies out there, the surveys, plus our experience is that if you skip this preparation stage and try to move directly from contemplation to action, you are really screwed because you haven't adequately researched and prepared. Here's a big one: you haven't accepted what it's going to take to make this change. It's a major change, and it's going to
Yeah.
be difficult. And if you haven't accepted that it's going to be difficult, then you're going to stop as soon as it gets difficult. So you're setting yourself up. If you skip this preparation stage, you're setting yourself up. That said, we talked in one of our podcasts about getting stuck in planning. You can get stuck in this
Yeah.
stage too. Plan sounds good, makes you feel good, but at some point you got to pull the trigger and move forward on it, right?
I'd love more people to get stuck on planning. I think more people get stuck on, do I want to do this? So, I get it. But the fact that they want to stop the behavior, stop the affair, stop acting out in your mind is a big flag, big green flag. I want to stop this. Okay, well, here's how we stop it, right?
If you don't have that desire, that motivation, and one of the things is it can't be about somebody else. You can start that way, but if it doesn't turn into being about you making these changes for you to become a better human being, and more living in your integrity, and making your emotional restitution at some point, you're gonna flop. It can't be about, I'm doing this for my kids, I'm doing it for my partner, I'm doing it for because it's the right thing to do. No, you've got to have, this is where that selfishness piece is actually what I like to call soulfish, right?
Mm,
SOUL fish, right? And that is, you're doing it because if you don't, you're really screwed, because
yeah,
you're not going to be able to make it very far in this. Certainly, those can be motivating factors, but they can't be the primary. So you got to get clear on what you're doing. There's motivation is great, but if you're not clear, this is the behavior, or these are the behaviors I am stopping, right?
right.
This is, I am no longer going to treat my partner this way. I am no
Yes.
longer going to act out in this way. I'm no longer going to treat myself in that way. I'm no longer going to be a victim. If you can really get clear on that, then that's going to allow you sort of a platform from which you're going to jump to the next stage. And, it also gives you the idea of, okay, now I need to know where I'm going to start, right? How am I going to initiate this change? What's the ignition on that rocket going to be? And could it be stop? Could it be go to treatment? Could it be go to a meeting? Could it be find a professional? Could be any number of things that can take you in that positive direction. You're going to have to identify and gather the necessary resources to do this. That's people, that's books, that's podcasts, and so on. Don't rely on books and podcasts. You need people who can actually help you
Yeah.
find the next part. And we've talked about this before, so I'll kind of run down these fast. Get rid of the triggers. Do not engage with the same people that you engaged with in the past. Well, especially not an affair partner, but the people who have sort of co-signed your BS, don't engage with them. Don't go to places that remind you of that. Don't do things that are going to take you into that place. Don't reminisce. That's a big problem. Going into fantasy about what you used to do and how much fun it was. How much fun it was is the fantasy, because there's reality that went with it that hopefully you're now seeing. Do those 3 circles we talked about: no zone, danger zone, go zone, that we talked about early in an earlier podcast. Get your support in place. And all of that is vital to do at the very start.
How about we sum it up with one of these little handy statements? Stop thinking that you know what you need because you got yourself in this mess.
right?
So maybe humble yourself and trust somebody, right? Because as you're saying these things, it just gets me going because we make this massive mess of our life and then we think we know how to fix it. I know what we need to do, Sam. I just know it. Do you really? Because if you did, you probably wouldn't have put yourself in this position or you would have already been doing it, right?
Yeah,
Okay, I digress. So now we're moving into the
I
next
know.
stage.
Arrogance got them into this, and arrogance won't get them out.
Amen or oh my, as they say. So what's the next stage as we head into number 4?
Action, right? This is where the real change is going to take place, right? It's going to be behavioral to start and stopping these things. That's actually, as hard as it is, it's actually the easiest part. Then it's going to go to changing my thoughts, which all of these overlap, right?
Yeah.
Changing how I'm thinking, to looking at my emotions, dealing with my emotions. So we'll talk about it in another podcast, but we'll talk about behavioral sobriety, thought sober, and emotional sobriety. Those are 3 key concepts in recovery that we'll go over in another thing. But just suffice it to say that those are going to be taking place. Frankly, you start at the behavioral. Relational, especially behavior surrounding how you relate to your partner, to other people, it has to be from the beginning as well. Uh,
Yeah.
out of respect, being respectful, being truthful, being honest, being empathetic, which takes some time to learn, and so on. What a key component that it takes. I'm not big on saying willpower is the be all and end all. It's not.
Right.
That'll end up being white knuckling. But it does take willpower to move from one stage to the other.
Absolutely. This is not easy work. This is, excuse me, we think that magically we're just going to arrive at these stages when I was telling somebody just yesterday, I kind of reverse engineered it. I said, you're trying to repair trauma that has gone through every generation of your family that you can remember. Why should this be easy? Why should this be simple? It's supposed to be hard because other members in your bloodline have been prisoners of it too, and you're finally willing to stand up to it. You're finally willing to go 10 or 15 rounds with it. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take everything that you have and then the right people around you to support you even more, right?
Yeah, and generational trauma is so deeply buried because it's generational. I mean, it's been
Yeah.
taught from generation to generation to not trust, to not feel, to not talk. So that is, you bring up a great point. Why should it be quick? There's a I used to be essentially do physical therapy. I was a massage therapist, sports therapist for years, and the older an injury was, the longer it took to get
Yeah.
that right. So that's just the way it is with a lot of this too. There's causative stuff that has been around for a long time. This is also where, so getting back to the action, it's where the steps that you've planned out in preparation stage are executed. Bear in mind that soldiers like to say, I think generals like to say something about, okay, make a plan, and then once you're on the battlefield, that changes, right?
Right.
I know I've got that wrong. Somebody who has served will hopefully correct me. This is really important, is to know that whatever you've planned is really great, because that's going to help you guide you, and you got to be able to change that as you're getting more advice, and people's with experience are putting in on it, so that you can make each piece of this count. You got to be, speaking of making each piece count, if you're not thoroughly aware of what could take you out, so what your triggers are, you could be done real fast. So you need to have a list. And I'm going to say this one nice key thing: if it's, and it's always, you can't have a complete list. There are going to be things you don't know. You're going to have to see those come up, deal with them, because that's what your program is, right? But here's a key piece: if there's any doubt in your mind as to whether you should do something, don't.
Right.
That's just your,
It's a simple it's just a simple truth that if you want it, how bad do you want it? What are you willing to do? It's hard. It's it's agonizing, but how bad do you want your family? How bad do you want your life back, right?
yeah. We talk about in the addiction world, we talk about, okay, what's it going to take? What will you do? Anything I have to. Rubber meets the road. That's going to be a hard thing to stand up and do.
Because whether it's an affair partner or whether it's an addiction or whether it's an addiction to an affair partner, the fact is the withdrawal is so overwhelming. There has to be a plan, right?
Yeah, you got to be prepared. Withdrawal sucks. If it's from a person or multiple ways of acting out, the high that you get from that is higher than any you will experience during withdrawal. Expect 6 to 18 months of withdrawal symptoms. And those are going to be, you can liken a lot of drug withdrawal to the kind of withdrawal symptoms you get with this. Fatigue, illnesses come in, not thinking straight, being really cloudy, confused, or confusion in your brain. I mean, not like confused, like where did I park my car kind of stuff, right? But 6 to 18 months for the brain to repair, and that's the withdrawal symptom, right? So symptoms that are going on. So it'll include physical symptoms. You're gonna feel your feelings more intensely than maybe you ever have, and that is going to be likely going to be unpleasant. But and here's where things are a bit different. The positive feelings are going to lag
Right.
because you're getting through that, having been up here to here where you can feel normal pleasure again. So that's going to lag. So you're going to feel some intense anxiety, intense sadness, perhaps. So that's one of the reasons you really need help. Remember, these are, people talk about diagnoses. Oh, am I really diagnostically depressed? It's a working diagnosis. During withdrawal, that diagnosis may be the case. After withdrawal, it might not. So you might
Right.
to get help for those symptoms going through withdrawal, and then they may abate. Here's another thing for those who are looking from the outside in: the efforts you're making are noticeable. They can be observed, right? Key here: don't ask for gold stars.
Yeah.
One,
Just do your work. Just do your work.
the yes, the positives are over the long haul. If you're an SLAA, guess what? You can, when they do the chips, the white chip for the first day and so on, you can get a gold chip, which is just for making a significant change. You're not announcing what the change is, so it's between you and your higher power. I picked up a gold star, or not gold star, sorry, a gold chip. And that's a good way
Right.
to acknowledge that to yourself, but you're not asking for external validation about it. This is also where this action, you're most in danger of relapse. And somebody asked in the comments, and I sadly, I'm so sorry, I erased it by accident. I hit the wrong button. So
Yeah.
it was a great question. Isn't relapse a choice? At this point, yes, it is. We should have so many layers being built up that we have to deliberately go through those layers to get to relapse. We're cognizant, right, that we have a problem. So relapse is simply, to define it, it's going back to the behaviors that we did before we started to
Right.
change. One of the ways to avoid this, because it is emotionally draining, and that can be one of the things that takes us to relapse, is consistently reviewing why you're doing this.
Yeah.
That emotional effort can be so fatiguing, and it's also that makes it where you're most likely to dip into, excuse the term, but the F it bucket,
Yeah.
right?
Because don't you also have to have the ability to self-validate? Because it just gets so depressing and discouraging sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, especially when there's an addiction, it can be really difficult. But in that time, being able to validate yourself for going to a meeting with your therapist, reading, doing those things, it's key to validate your own progress. Am I right?
It is. We're not going, look at me, right? It's not like that. It's just saying, okay, that was really good. That was a healthy choice. I'm glad I made that, right? Rather than a lot of times, I mean, when I got my master's degree, I was in the mindset where I just went, okay, what's next? I didn't walk nothing, just, okay, what's next? Right? I didn't give
During mine, I was like, "Dear Lord, tiny baby Jesus, make this end fast." So I guess we were a little bit different in that. But okay, self-validating and then being able to get help. We've kind of talked about that, but isn't there a point where it's kind of like, listen, listen, bruh, listen, sister, bruh, it's time to receive influence.
yeah.
Until you can trust the people that you're working with, there's going to be a big disconnect. Am I right? Doesn't that make sense?
Yes, there is. And in order to trust, we are having to overcome quite a long history of not trusting, right? That
Yes.
trust
Well
on
said. Say it again. Say it again. Well said.
in trusting, we are having to overcome quite a long history of not trusting. One of
And
the
it
ways,
makes great sense.
yeah,
I'm so glad you said that because it's okay. It's okay to have been hurt and violated and affected and wounded and betrayed and man just completely left for dead totally. But maybe at this point in your life, it's time to at least go slow and steady with someone that has proven to be reputable, proven to be trustworthy. And I think the first time you meet with someone, you get a good feel. Like when I know the first time I met you, I was like, that dude gets it. That dude's safe. That dude's not trying to be anybody. He's just wanting to help. The first time you met me, I know that you were like, man, his hair, his eyes, he's so, no, I'm just kidding. But I think that you get a feel for that. And listen, for those of you that are watching and listening, at the end of the day, you have been hurt. We get it. But slow and steady, you got to open up your heart to someone that can help you get out of the pit that you have walked yourself into.
yeah. So I am going to say yes. I really loved your hair, but anybody who's bald would. So no, there's it's a building trust, right? It's going to be hard. So the biggest part of that, the willpower, is to say, okay, that person, I'm gonna put some trust in. That does not mean vomiting everything right away, right? Because
No.
there's an earning of trust too, but you have to give that chance for somebody to earn it. So you have to
Yes.
do something there. Here's a big deal. If you find yourself resistant to doing that or any part of the recovery, that's when you're going to be most prone to relapse, right? So
Yeah.
what we resist persists, and it's going to keep coming at you. So that's a key. I'm resisting talking about my stuff. Okay, so guess what you got to do? You got to talk about your stuff. It's really a relatively simple equation there. It's not easy to do, but it's when you got to use that willpower, you know.
And there's a point where, excuse me, the longer we go with this podcast, the more that we're hitting on just some key points that without those key points, you're just not going to make it. And I know that the viewer and listener is kind of like, man, is it really that important? It is more important than you can possibly cuss word imagine that you do these things. Because if you don't, you're just circling the mountain, as people of faith would say. You're just perpetuating the cycle. You're just repeating it all over again. So come to a point, and I can speak so strongly to this because I could tell it to myself because I kept doing the same things, wondering why nothing would change. Excuse me. So we come to this point, change is here, but there's an interesting fifth stage of change that as I was reading through our notes, I was like, you are such a teacher because this is a teacher point that a lot of people would probably be like, okay, there's action. Bro, leave me alone. We're good. There's action now. But what's the fifth and final stage of change?
So it's maintenance and growth.
I love it. I love it so much. Talk about it.
Maintenance, yeah, maintenance sounds it's kind of like a flat line, right? Oh well, change the oil, blah blah blah. Like maintenance is things like keeping your foot in whatever got you here in the first place. I mean, got you to recovery in the first place.
Right.
So for me, that's I got to go to meetings occasionally. Now I don't go to meetings every day anymore. There are some people who find that works for them. Awesome.
Sure.
For me, I utilized the meetings and the 12 steps kind of like a skeleton, if you will, for me to sort of build the muscle on, right? Although fat too, apparently. Uh,
Well, early on, I met with Rick sometimes at 6 in the morning. I hated it, and I'm not a morning person. I would have to be at his stupid office after fighting stupid traffic on stupid Highway 183 in Austin. And if you've ever been to Austin, you understand 183 is a joke in the morning. But I would be there at 6 a.m. Not every morning, but when we did meet at that time, I was there, and I would have my coffee because I was showing everybody that I was serious.
I've said this before, if it's something you really don't want to do, that's when you most need to do it.
Well said. What are
So,
some other stages of this?
not relapsing, continuing to achieve progress. So it's not standing still in what you've accomplished. And so it's a commitment to continued growth. Listen, at one point I was talking to my sponsor and making excuses for something. And he said, "What part of being in the ICU do you not understand?" Look, I often tell stories about my sponsor, and it sounds like he was really mean, but those things stuck. And you know why they stuck? Because he was a very kind sponsor. I mean, he still is. Um, you know,
And sometimes we need that. Sometimes we just need somebody, male or female, to just get real with us.
right. So this stage, you've moved out of the ICU, you've moved out of the hospital now, right? You could literally say, okay, action. Beginning of the action stage is when you're still in the ICU, and then you progress to the main floor and so on. Now you're out of the hospital. You don't want to go back in, right? It becomes there are places where things can become difficult. Life catches up, right? Stresses you out. And those old familiar coping strategies will pop into your head, and you got to deal
Yeah.
with those. This is why you need something like called a program. You've got to have things set so that you know how to deal with this stuff when it comes up, or you can end up going back to the same old stuff that you did, and you'll get back in the same quagmire you've always been in, doing the same hurt and harm that you did. So being successful in not relapsing or not getting on the road to relapse, and that includes changing your thoughts over time.
Yeah.
So eventually you'll notice, wow, there's like hardly ever any thoughts or temptations or fantasies coming into my head. When they do, you can go, oh, what the heck was that? Why was that?
Right.
It's just a cue telling you to wake up because something is going on that isn't good. And so that's a cue. It doesn't mean, oh my God, I'm going to relapse. It can if you ignore it. But if you go, okay, that's a cue, I'm going to jump on it, figure out what it is, ask some questions, get help, right? When triggers don't trigger you anymore, or rarely, in between, early on, they probably still will, but it's progressive, right? And hopefully they won't. But you also know what to do with them, and you do it.
Yes.
Consistently reminding yourself of the progress you've made, but also consistently reminding yourself of where you were. People think that's a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if you start to engage in it, reminiscing and euphoric recall, right? We
Yeah.
call it staying in the SLAA. We call it, well, all A programs. We call it staying green. If I go to a meeting and somebody's brand new, it's not going to drag me back. What it's going to do is remind me of where I was and be grateful for what I now have, right?
Yeah.
Um, you're going to continue to, speaking of grateful, yeah, do a gratitude list consistently. That's going to help you stay here. That's maintenance. Continuing
Yep.
to acquire new skills and digging deeper into why I got there in the first place. What drove me to that? What were the drives that existed? Was I, a validation seeker? Was I looking for nurture all the time, and so on? You've got to know what those drives are, or you're going to be always in imminent danger of relapse. So it's kind of like a danger, Will Robinson, danger moment.
Yeah. Totally.
Um, being constantly aware of your relapse template. So that includes most of the stuff I've talked about, triggers and so on. Why, when I'm in this emotional state, I'm vulnerable to relapse. I'm tender. When I'm around these places, some things you cannot avoid. By golly, try to avoid them as much as you can, except for the feeling.
Right.
Feelings can be very triggering, but you have to work how to, or learn how to move through those. Places, though, you don't see very many alcoholics running into a liquor store and sort of sitting and going, I can resist this, I can resist this. Not really their
Yeah.
bag. So we got to
Right.
think that way. Always remain aware of the meaning of what you're striving for, the meaning of family, the meaning of being at peace, having serenity in your life for once, the meaning of knowing what to do, making the right choices, the meaning of being honest, right? These all have incredible meaning to us because we're living in our integrity. That is
Yeah.
all of this worth it. You got to be patient. Being patient does not mean that I'm giving myself permission to screw up.
Not at all. Correct.
Being patient with myself says, okay, I'm learning. I cannot be perfect at this right at the beginning. I'm going to learn, and it's going to be gradual, and I'm going to get better and better at it. And if I mess up, I'm going to make amends. I'm going to ask for help, and so on. It's not a light switch. This is very
And
much.
that's what I think it's so vital for everyone to remember, that there's this two coexisting truths. It's not a light switch, no. And there should be fruit, growth. There should be examples of change that your partner or spouse can look at and go, I see these things, so I'm starting to feel safer. I'm not safe. I'm not even trusting you again. As one of my clients said most recent, and I said, I looked at her and said, yes. She said, I want to trust my husband. And that means a lot to me. And I said, that means a lot to him. That means a lot to me. That needs to mean a lot to yourself, because you are progressing and the trajectory is going like that. So as we close, you've given so much today. I've made some great jokes, quite honestly. I'm pretty proud of my jokes and little puns here and there, but you've given so much. Maybe take just 1 minute and encourage them, because this is hard as hell, and it's okay that it's hard as hell. If it wasn't hard as hell, there'd be so many people that would have been already changed, and relapse wouldn't even be a thing, and it would be so much easier. But what do you want to leave them with today as they are trying to get an idea for where they're at in this whole stages of change?
And I don't know if I did this in a previous podcast, but I really love this story. There was an environmental scientist named Garrett Hardin, wrote several books back in the 70s and 80s, and he was paraplegic, right? And so the book I read this in, there were a bunch of people, three really important people, head of the Sierra Club, and so on, who were considering whether there should be a lift put in on this beautiful mountain. And of all people, you would have expected Garrett Hardin to say, absolutely, I want to see what's up there. He said no. And when David Brower, the head of the Sierra Club at the time, said, well, why? You won't get to see it. He said, I won't have earned it, and so it won't be as meaningful to me.
Mm, beautiful.
Yeah.
No, but it's a beautiful picture of being able. I was talking to a group of high school baseball players the other day, and I said to them, listen, men, adults, or women who are adults do this. They embrace where they're at, and they say, I put myself here. So if you're an unfaithful, one of the most courageous things that you could do is to say, I put myself here. I can take ownership. And while I can't fix it and I can't flip a light switch, I can start flipping switches and making choices that can lead me to getting healthy, because I don't need to blame or put it on everybody else. I can put it on me, accept where I'm at, because we always have two choices, Gabor Mate said. We have the choice to be vulnerable or the choice to be a victim. And when we're vulnerable, we can say, I put myself here. I hate that I put myself here. I hate myself for this, but I'm going to get healthy. And I'm not just going to keep blaming and putting it on everybody else. And, oh, I wasn't this and I didn't get this. You know what? I am where I am at. It is okay that I am where I am at, because I can accept where I'm at because of where I want to be. And I'm going to get the right people, and I'm going to get the right pathway, and I'm going to make the right choices. And so I think today was beautiful, James. I'm always honored to do this with you. And on behalf of James and I, we're honored that you've tuned in today. If we can help, you can reach out at asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. Leave a comment here. We'd love to read your comments, the nice ones anyway. And we would love for you to subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time on Ask the Unfaithful.